day 420 off the grid. And yeah, this was quite a nice sunny day for most of the day. It started out a bit cloudy in the morning, but the clouds come in again and we've got some wind now at the end of the day. And I've been working on the battery fridge today, which is a thing that I've been meaning to make a video about for a long time, but I don't think I've ever quite got round to really making a video on the battery fridge. And now it's already gone through a fairly significant upgrade. More on that in a minute. I'll show you the battery fridge. So this is an old fridge. In fact, it used to be the fridge we used to use in Foxton Beach, but for some reason when we moved it to Shannon after a while of non-use, when we plugged it in again, it didn't work. So, well, the motor worked, but it just didn't freeze, so it kind of got scuttled and retasked ultimately here. I made this roof out of scrap tin left over from one of Poppy's shed building projects. Attached it to the top here, just screwed directly into the metal actually with this wood. Attach this on, so that keeps the rain off and keeps the rust a bit at bay. Now there's batteries in here. It's what's called a battery fridge, and we've got the world's simplest solar setup, although it's finished for the day now. This fan blows air in, you know, keep the battery fumes from building up, and I say it's the simplest solar rig out. It's direct running. That wire there leads to a small 1.5 watt or 1.2 watt panel mounted up on the roof. Just one of those little battery top up ones that are sold for exorbitant prices at places like Walmart and that kind of thing. And it's just directly running the fan with the addition of this Xenon diode here. So that's why I say it's the world's simplest solar system, because this in fact is, of course, well, it's not a charge controller because there's no battery, nothing's being controlled and it's charging, but it's a load regulator. It's stopping the voltage of that panel rising above 12 volts, which, while not strictly necessary, does improve the life of a computer fan in this role, because otherwise in bright sun this can easily get hit with 17 volts and it won't last like that. So that's the air intake. It sucks air in the bottom here. A little bit of consumer plastic. It's done the job nicely. So as you can see, it's been on there for ages. But anyway, the guts of what makes this the battery fridge, because it's got batteries in it, right? Okay, this top layer here was the original batteries in the battery fridge, but they were actually down on this level. So what I put in, I started a little bit the day before and finished off today, was shifting them up to this top layer and making this bottom layer for other batteries. These are the first, they're basically just starter batteries, just flooded lead acid batteries that I bought from the warehouse when I first started getting into solar and wanted some decent batteries, you know, batteries that were new that I could wreck, that weren't already wrecked for me. After I had that disaster with those little UASA 32 amp hour gel cell things. So I bought two, one of these, then two, and then another two, and you know, and these were part of the A bank for quite a long time, and they still work, but eventually they ended up being part of the 24 volt system. That's why they're coupled together like this. See, they're in pairs, and then they're in series. Okay. But today I finally finished moving in these two batteries, and these were the ones I retired from actually out of the shed. So these were part of the 24 volt system in shed A here. These were actually the batteries that, this was one of the ones that main terminal was taken from. So these are good batteries, well, good being a relative term. They're not completely stuffed. They are not that great either, but they do work, you know, so they've got some capacity left in them, although not as much as I would like, and obviously not as much as those red ones that I swapped out. Well, swapped in and swapped these out. So I thought I'd move them into the battery fridge and beef up the battery fridge a little bit. So these of course are wired in series, and they're wired in parallel with all those flooded ones up there. Which I guess I should get to the point of, how can I have flooded batteries and gel cells on the same circuit? Well, this is my stunning cunt, or you know, cunning stunt. the voltage that the system runs at is basically a voltage that's suitable for just about any battery. AGMs are fine on it, these gels seem to be fine on it, but it wouldn't be so great for flooded because they might sulfate, so this is my solution. Maybe I've even shown this before. What we have here is an inductor made from a powdered iron core with about 8 or so turns of the charge current wire wrapped around it, secured with cable ties. So all the current in and out of these batteries, which of course is DC, has to flow through this inductor. Therefore, nothing high frequency can pass through that, because an inductor like that will stop high frequencies. So therefore we have this little desulfator which is on these batteries here, and its pulses, being high frequency, will stay in these batteries and will not disappear this away. This will block them. So it's almost like a diode. It's like low frequency through high frequency, no. So the pulses that this generates will just stay within these batteries, hopefully stopping them from sulfating at the lower voltage they're being run at. So far it seems to be really effective, and this has been over a year now. Obviously these being gels, I do not need it on those, so they are connected in after the inductor. And this breaker, incidentally a 20 amp AC breaker, which I have every confidence in will continue working fine. In fact, this breaker will probably outlast anything else you see in here, including the fridge. It'll still be working long after everything else is stuffed. So from there it feeds down here into the main bank, and of course a negative over here. Now this is a technique that I've come to call remote or loose coupling. I think I like the term loose coupling. Now I should really explain that. Loose coupling is what a lot of the guys with radio do. Loose coupling is when you connect, say, an aerial to a radio just by winding a couple of turns of wire around the antenna coil or antenna rod and connecting your aerial or whatever to that. So you're not really making a really tight connection to the circuit, so it's kind of loosely connected. That's loose coupling. Well, I use it to describe the way I've deliberately ran these batteries through relatively light gauge cable a couple of meters all the way back into the shed to the battery bank. I think I've shown this a bit before too, where they're connected here. Right? And what that will do is it will deliberately cause these batteries to take less current when they're charging and contribute less when they're running the load, at least initially, until these other batteries are flatter. And you think, well, why on earth would you want to do that? That's because if these are not deep cycle batteries, so I don't want them to cycle deeply. I want them to cycle in a shallow way, so loose coupling. But yet they will still help run the load. So, you know, as for these, yeah, well, these are going to be under the same situation, but like I say, these batteries are old and a bit tired, so they could deserve to have a bit of a rest too. So it's a way of getting more power into the bank without actually having to make a bigger battery bank right there. You could even switch this in and out if you wanted to. But that's my battery fridge, and of course, besides batteries, I've got all the stuff I need to maintain the flooded batteries in here, like, you know, hydrometer and various bits and bobs for topping batteries up. And here's my distilled water collection. I take these bottles down to the railway station and run the distiller down there off the grid when I do my watch, and fill up a litre or a quart of pure distilled water from my old distiller. And in here I've got my dipsticks, a jar that I usually suck the water out of when I'm using those sucker bulb type thingies, and these are the original caps off that one that I replaced for the hydro caps. So that's the battery fridge. And yeah, putting those grey gel cells in is what I essentially did today. So hopefully that'll give us more grunt for the fridge and freezer. But there's something else I also did for that. Oh, that wind is really getting up. I've got to lock myself in the shed to stop the wind from flying the door open. Okay, this here is a boost converter. I've talked about this before. You've seen this before. It's completely homemade. There's no pick or blooming Arduino or anything involved with this. It's simply a 555 here which makes the pulses, and I can control the duty cycle and the frequency by tweaking this little preset pot here until I get what I want. And this here is one of my voltage controlled charge controller circuits, so this can basically cut this out when the battery gets topped up so it doesn't keep going. Right, I made one little mod to this that has made a world of difference, and I'll show you what that was. Now the power source for this comes in here, this yellow wire. Now that used to be connected up here to this diode, which, well, basically it used to be connected directly to the solar panels up here. I took the clip off there and clipped it down here, which now means it's actually being fed from the 12 volt A bank. Yeah, that's right, it's actually being fed from the battery bank now. It's on the battery side. Now this creates an interesting situation, because now the voltage that this point can get to is far more controlled. It's only ever going to be, you know, up to about 14.4 or 14.5 and down to maybe 12, and not any lower than that, rather than the sweeping range that could be up here on this terminal, because it could be anything from nearly 20 volts when the panels are fully lightly loaded down to the lowest battery voltage that the system is seeing. So it means it's a more stable voltage for the boost converter to run at, and of course the batteries will keep pumping out voltage after the sun goes. So that basically means I can dribble a bit of charge from these batteries down here, battery bank A, into the 24 volt bank here all night. Yeah, all night. Now I know you're probably immediately thinking, well, that's kind of idiotic to charge batteries with batteries, because it's not very efficient, because you've got the loss of efficiency of charging the first batteries, and then you've got the loss of efficiency for charging the next batteries from those batteries. But it doesn't actually quite work out like that, because this inverter here has got a lot of... Oh look, there's Baffy at the window. There's Baffy. He's made the garden down there by the shed. I should actually show that before I cut this off. Right. This inverter, it runs the fridge and freezer, but it's also got, I wouldn't say parasitic loads, it's got a lot of residual loads on it, like the ding-dongs, like time switches, basically anything in the house that needs power all the time but doesn't use that much power is plugged into this, because it's got to be on all the time for the fridge and freezer. So those residual loads do add up to a constant current draw that the inverter is taking, which works out to be most of the time, conveniently, around about 1 amp. So what I've done is I've tuned the boost converter so that it supplies 1 amp into the 24 volt bank here at night when there's no solar charge. During the day that'll increase, but at night it supplies 1 amp, and that comes through this brown wire here, which comes out of it down here. In order to get 1 amp out of it, because the other batteries are half the voltage, I've obviously got to put 2 amps in here, and that comes out of the day batteries at 2 amps, and it goes into here at 1 amp, you know, from 12 volts to 24 volts, you know, approximately. And it's pretty efficient. It's pretty efficient. It's way up there in the high 90s, I'm sure. Like in the high 90s, you know. Seems to me that building your own boost converters is a lot easier to make good ones than it is to build your own buck converters and get a really high performance. That's what I've found. Yeah, I think there's something in that I'm going to look into further, because a boost converter could be used for MPPT, but that's a subject of another day. But what I'm doing here is I'm basically dribbling a small charge from my day batteries into my 24 volt bank, but what essentially I'm doing is balancing what the inverter takes all the time with that charge coming in. So effectively, that residual charge on the inverter is being run by the day batteries. And then these batteries are only really being called upon when the heavy loads come on, like the freezer and the fridge, or anything else that's slightly above that normal residual 1 amp. So that has been really successful so far. And so I'm just going to be, you know, tweaking this unit to work like that. Because I was almost thinking about retiring this. I thought this was on its way out, but as the season's declined, it's, you know, other steps have proven to be necessary. So that's where we're at. But yeah, this setup I'm finding for me is really good. You know, I mean, my setup's very personal. It's my own thing. You know, I know a lot about electronics. You know, I mean. So I don't have to worry too much about getting really technical with things, so therefore I'm building things that suit my system and my situation to, well, it's also based a lot around the fact that I'm trying to do it with junk and cheap stuff, and, you know, not spend a lot of money on it too. So I can do that, you know. I mean, that's not the case for everyone. Some people have to use more off-the-shelf stuff and not get too far into it, because it can get out of hand pretty quickly. But I'm very comfortable with what I'm doing. I know some people might look at all these wires and go, oh fuck, that's crazy, oh that's dangerous even, but no, it's not dangerous, not to me, because I know exactly what everything does and what voltages are where, and there's no obscenely high voltages exposed to touch anywhere, anyway, you know. All mains voltages are well put away under insulation, under covers, you know, done properly. All this exposed wires you can see are 12 volts or 24, so yeah, it's no biggie. But you know, it's going pretty well, and things are, of course, always more of a challenge as you start to head towards the darker seasons. And you know, in 3 weeks time it will practically be the day of autumn equinox, so you know, we're on the way, and we're starting to get a bit more of the bad weather. As you can see out there, she's fairly dark. So yeah, man, I think this is long enough. I wasn't trying to make this too long, but I thought that, you know, inevitably it's going to be, because I wanted to cover the finer points of the battery fridge and what I'm doing with this boost converter. So it was bound to be, wasn't it? So there we go, day 420 off the grid.